My work since 1975 has been on paper or with paper, and to a great extent about paper, what its possibilities are and what it can communicate about nature and the natural processes in the world around us. The piece here is one of my first really sculptural paper pieces. It was done in 1984. It's handmade paper, cotton linters that were later painted and burned using a propane torch. This is one of 6 pieces in the series. This is called Burned Tree. This is another piece from the Paper Becoming Tree series, which has been ongoing since 1984. This is also a burned tree, but it's made out of a different kind of paper than the previous Paper Becoming Tree piece. It's made out of a Japanese handmade paper called hosho, which is usually used for woodblock printing. But it has a peculiar quality, which I discovered, of taking a mold, taking a texture when it's wet off of a mold. So I made a silicone mold off of a tree trunk, wet the hosho, pressed it into the texture of the mold, and crushed the other part of the paper and then let it dry. And when it came out, it maintained the shape of both the draped paper and the textured mold. Then afterward, it was painted with oil-based paints and pastels. It's another example of the connections that I see between the nature of paper and the nature of trees. This is another piece from the Paper Becoming Tree series, in which I used a silicone mold of the cedar bark. Cedar bark has vertical striations, and that was the clue for me to fold the paper vertically. And what I tried to do in all of the Paper Becoming Tree pieces is retain in some part of the image the natural look of the paper, the recognizability of the paper, and then to transform it, as artists transform all of their materials anyway, into the art object or the aesthetic experience. This is entitled Paper Becoming Eucalyptus, and it was made of silkscreen, variegated blend of silkscreen inks on paper, and 3 layers of paper that have been crushed to simulate the texture of the eucalyptus bark, and then peeled back, torn and peeled back, the way the eucalyptus bark peels off of the tree itself. There are 3 convex shapes representing the tree trunks. This was one of the most recent of the Paper Becoming Tree series, 1987, and represents the bark of the Melaleuca tree, which struck me as being a very paper-like tree. This is the outer bark, and to get a naturalness of texture and an intricate texture as the bark of the tree has, I first buried the silk-screened paper in the ground for several weeks, and then when I took it out of the ground while it was still wet, I wrapped it around the trunk of a Melaleuca tree and pressed the wetted print with a roller into the trunk to try to pick up some of the surface textures and surface patterns on the tree itself into the print. Afterward, I tore the paper after it was dried and removed from the tree trunk. I tore the paper and painted it with oils. This is a piece related to the previous piece. It is also representing the bark of the Melaleuca tree, and it was constructed and prepared in exactly the same way as the previous piece. This one shows the inner bark and slightly more reddish and yellowish ochre coloration of the inner bark of the Melaleuca tree.